At the edge of a quiet Russian river, where mist rolls in like memory and the trees whisper old stories, a lonely bear cub waited. Each morning, just after sunrise, it padded to the same muddy bank, sat still, and gazed across the water. It wasn't food the cub sought, it was someone. Months earlier, a humble fisherman named Yuri had shared his warmth, his fish, and his silent company with the orphaned cub. Day by day, they forged a bond. No leashes, no cages, just quiet trust. But one morning, Yuri vanished. The cub didn't understand. Still, it returned. Every day. Through falling leaves, through snow, through the ache of waiting. What made this wild creature wait? And what happened when the old man finally came back? This is not just a story of man and beast, it's a story of memory, devotion, and a river that witnessed love without words. The river was still that morning, so still it mirrored the sky. Mist curled above its glassy surface like a memory trying to take shape. On the far bank, reeds rustled with soft wind, and beside them, a shadow moved. Small. Hesitant. Curious. It was a cub, not more than a few months old. Dark fur clumped from rain, ribs showing slightly through its damp coat. It had been alone for days, its mother likely fallen to the harshness of the forest or perhaps to something colder, a trap, a bullet, or simple starvation. The cub didn't know. All it remembered was her warmth. Now it wandered, sniffing for fish bones, chewing bark, and circling the river as if its waters might somehow bring her back. Yuri had noticed the tracks first. A set of tiny paw prints in the mud not far from his boat dock. He was a man of few words and even fewer visitors. His tiny wooden cabin leaned against the forest's edge like an old man against a cane. He had fished this river for nearly 30 years and trusted its rhythm more than any man. But that morning, something broke the rhythm. A splash. Not the kind of splash that came from a fish, or even a heron landing. This was something heavier, clumsier, startled. He followed the sound and found the cub, soaked, trembling, struggling to drag a branch from the water. Its paws were clumsy, but its eyes were desperate. Yuri didn't approach. He simply sat on a fallen log, watching. The cub froze when it noticed him, breathing hard. For long minutes, neither moved. The river whispered between them. Then slowly, Yuri unwrapped a parcel from his coat, smoked trout, and placed it near the log before retreating to his boat. He didn't look back. But he listened. The cub didn't come right away. But after 10 minutes, maybe 15, the crunching of soft fish bones reached Yuri's ears. He smiled, just barely. No words. Just the soft exhale of someone who had been waiting for something he hadn't realized he needed. The next day, the cub returned. So did Yuri. They kept their distance at first, man on the log, bear by the riverbank. But something invisible moved between them. Not taming, not training, and certainly not ownership. It was simpler. Something like understanding. Yuri began to leave a piece of fish every day. The cub would wait for him, sitting upright, its head tilting at the sound of his boots crunching leaves. It never approached too close. But neither did it run. Some days, Yuri talked softly, about the river, about his wife who had passed 5 winters ago, about the silence that filled the house now. The cub listened, its ears twitching at the sound of his voice. It didn't speak, of course. But it stayed. And that was enough. By the end of autumn, the cub had grown stronger. Its coat was thicker. It had learned to fish clumsily on its own, swiping its slow trout with a playful ferocity. Yuri often watched from a distance, pipe unlit between his teeth. And then, just as quietly as he had come into the cub's life, Yuri was gone. The frost came early that year. Each morning, the forest awoke beneath a crust of ice, and the river whispered beneath a skin of silver. Snow hadn't yet arrived, but the wind had turned sharp, biting through bark and fur alike. The bear cub, no longer as small, but still far from grown, paced the riverbank. He nosed at the edge of the dock, sniffed the air, and sat, waiting, as he had the day before, and the day before that. But Yuri never came. The cabin stood silent, its chimney still. No fire, no movement. The boat, always tethered to the wooden stake by the reeds, now floated slightly crooked, its rope tangled and worn. The bear didn't know what had happened. He only knew something was missing. He waited for hours, ears twitching at every rustle. A squirrel. A gust of wind. A shifting branch. But none of them brought Yuri's boots on the forest floor. None brought the soft rustle of a coat or the deep hum of his voice speaking nonsense to the river. Days passed. The cub grew hungry. He sniffed along the edge of the cabin, cautious, respectful. He didn't push at the door. Instead, he returned to the log where Yuri used to sit and curled up beneath it, his nose tucked under his paw, breath clouding in the cold. The river, once their shared companion, grew harder each day. Ice crept along its edges, freezing trout beneath. No fish. No fire. No man. And still, the bear waited. He remembered Yuri's smell, old wood smoke, fish oil, and the faint trace of pine. He remembered the rhythm of his movements, always slow and deliberate. The way his voice didn't need to be loud to feel warm. And more than anything, he remembered what it felt like not to be alone. Animals don't cry the way humans do. But loneliness, deep primal loneliness, can show itself in other ways. In how a creature stops playing. How it moves slower. Sleeps more. Hunts less. The bear didn't leave the riverbank. Not even when the snow finally arrived. Across the valley, in the small town of Komutovo, people whispered about Yuri's disappearance. Some said he'd simply wandered into the forest, old and tired, as animals do when their time is near. Others thought he may have slipped near the river's edge. No one had seen him in weeks. But no one dared check the cabin. It was too deep in bear country. Too close to the pines. Too far from everything else. Only one person cared enough to try. Katya, Yuri's granddaughter, had always felt a quiet bond with a man who smelled like wood smoke and river water. She'd spent summers with him as a child, learning to bait hooks, build fires, and sit in silence without needing to fill it with words. When she heard he was missing, she packed a backpack, strapped on her snowshoes, and set out. The trail was faint under the snow, but she remembered it by heart. When Katya reached the cabin, the first thing she saw was the boat, half sunken, its oar frozen mid-drift. Then the door, closed, but not locked. The windows were fogged from the inside. No footprints. Just stillness. She stepped cautiously toward the porch, and then she froze. There, under the snow-laden log, a shape stirred. She gasped, half in fear, half in disbelief. A young bear, large now, but unmistakably a cub in posture, lay curled in the snow. Its fur was matted with ice. But its eyes were wide and waiting. Not feral. Not wild. Just waiting. Katya didn't move. The cold stung her cheeks, but all she could feel was the breath caught in her throat. The bear stared at her, head lifted, ears alert, chest rising in slow, visible puffs. It wasn't aggressive. It wasn't afraid. It was familiar. She blinked. The bear blinked back. And then, it slowly stood up. Katya backed up one step, hand brushing the handle of the hiking axe strapped to her pack. She didn't want to use it, not unless she had no choice. But the bear didn't growl. Didn't charge. Instead, it turned, and walked to the porch of the cabin. Then, unbelievably, it sat. Katya whispered under her breath, "What on earth?" She stepped forward cautiously, every crunch of her boots echoing in the silence. The bear didn't flinch. When she reached the porch steps, it moved aside, just a little, as if inviting her to pass. The cabin door creaked open. Inside, it was colder than she remembered. No fire. No Yuri. But everything was exactly where he'd left it. Fishing rods lined against the wall, the tin kettle still on the stove, his heavy coat hanging on a nail by the door. And then she saw the picture frame on the table, a photo of her and Yuri, fishing, smiling. A younger version of her, with a trout dangling from a hook, and his hand resting on her shoulder. A lump rose in her throat. She lit the fire with frozen fingers. The warmth crept through the room slowly. She took off her pack, unzipped it, and set out a tin of bread and cheese, basic rations. Then she opened the side pouch, and pulled out an old collar. The leather was cracked but intact. A brass tag jingled faintly. She had found it in Yuri's shed weeks ago, oddly clean, as if recently handled. The name etched on the tag, Misha. And on the back, "Take care of him if I can't." Why? Katya's fingers trembled. She turned toward the window. The bear sat just beyond the glass, staring at the flames through the fogged pane. This was Misha. Yuri had raised him. She stepped back outside, the collar clutched tightly in her hand. The bear watched her silently. As she approached, slowly, cautiously, he lowered his head. Not out of submission, but recognition. He knew her. He remembered. She reached out, barely breathing. The bear didn't move. Carefully, she slipped the collar around his thick neck. It didn't fasten properly, he was much larger now, but the gesture mattered. And then she sat down next to him, on the frozen porch. Neither of them spoke. One couldn't. The other didn't need to. Together, they watched the firelight flicker behind the cabin windows. Katya stayed 3 days in the cabin. She searched for signs of Yuri, combing the woods, calling his name. She found his walking stick near the riverbank, and a faint trail leading into the pines, but nothing else. At night, Misha guarded the porch. He didn't wander. Didn't hunt. He simply stayed close. Waiting. Each morning, Katya would find him sitting by the boat, as if hoping it might drift in carrying the old man. But it never did. By the 4th morning, Katya made a decision. She packed her bag, stacked firewood inside the cabin, and left a note on the table for anyone who might come after. Then she walked to Misha, gently held his face, and whispered, "You don't have to wait anymore." But Misha didn't move. Katya didn't expect the bear to follow her. She had said her goodbye. She had whispered thanks. She had made peace with leaving Misha behind, where the memory of Yuri was strongest. But as she hiked through the forest, glancing back one last time, there he was. Lumbering a few paces behind, paused silent on the snow-covered path, head slightly lowered, eyes focused only on her. "Misha," she said softly, unsure whether to smile or cry. "You can't come with me." But the bear had already decided. Whatever had tethered him to that cabin was now in her hands. The journey down from the mountains was grueling. Snowstorms swept across the ridges. Ice broke beneath her boots. More than once, she thought they'd have to turn back. But Misha was tireless. When her pack grew too heavy, he nudged her forward with his shoulder. When she slipped, he steadied her, not with brute strength, but quiet presence. They camped beneath pine canopies and shared dried meat from her rations. He didn't beg or growl or act like the wild predators she'd read about. He simply sat beside the fire, eyes half closed, as though listening to every pop of the wood. One night, as wind howled through the valley and snow coated their shelter, she whispered, "You remember him, don't you?" Misha looked up. She continued, voice cracking, "Yuri, he must have raised you from a cub. I think you were his last promise." The bear blinked slowly, then lowered his head and slept beside her tent, like a guardian. Word spread quickly when they reached the edge of the village. A bear walking with a woman? Peacefully? Nobody believed it, until they saw it with their own eyes. Police were cold. Wildlife officers. Cameras clicked. Misha stayed close, calm, uninterested in the chaos. Katya held her hands up, explaining again and again, "He's not dangerous. He's trained. He's grieving." "He's a bear," one official snapped. "He belongs in the wild." But when they tried to tranquilize him, the situation turned. Misha didn't attack, but he placed himself between Katya and the officers, baring his teeth just enough to send a clear message. No one would touch her. A local reporter streamed the scene live. The footage went viral in hours. Mysterious woman and the bear that protects her. The internet exploded with theories. Is she a bear whisperer? Was he raised as a pet? Is this a movie stunt? The truth was simpler, and more profound. Katya was summoned to the Regional Wildlife Board. An emergency hearing was scheduled. She was told, "You can't keep a bear. Even if he's tame. He's a wild animal." "He chose me," she said. "But policies don't listen to hearts." They issued an order. Misha would be transferred to a sanctuary hundreds of miles away. Sedated. Caged. Released far from human contact. Katya protested. Pleaded. But the decision was final. She was given one night. Just one. That evening, she walked with Misha through the woods outside town. The stars flickered through bare branches. Snow fell softly, brushing his fur like confetti from a world that didn't understand what they were. She stopped in a clearing, tears running down her face. "I tried, Misha," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." The bear looked at her. Then slowly, He stepped forward and pressed his massive head against her chest. She broke. Her sobs echoed through the trees, muffled only by the silence of his fur. When they returned, the officers were waiting. Misha didn't resist. But before he was led away, he turned his head, one last time, to look at her. And in that look, she saw it all: memory, sorrow, understanding. And something more. Trust. The sanctuary was quiet. Nestled deep in the woods, far from any town, it was a place designed for isolation and healing. Misha was given a large enclosed forest zone, complete with a den, trees, even a stream. To the staff, he was just another rescued bear. But to Katya, he was still Misha, the soul that had walked beside her through grief and storm. Weeks passed. She visited when she could. Stood behind the barriers, watching him from a distance. Sometimes he glanced at her. Other times, he just sat in silence, as if waiting for someone who'd never return. One day, while sorting through Yuri's last box of belongings, Katya found a sealed envelope. It was labeled in his handwriting. For Katya, if anything ever happens. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a letter. And in that letter, a truth she never expected. My dearest Katya. If you're reading this, then I'm gone. But Misha is still with you, isn't he? I know him. He wouldn't leave you. He never left me. He's not just any bear. He's not even one I found in the wild. I rescued him when he was barely a week old, mother killed in a trap. I fed him with a bottle, slept beside him on cold nights, taught him not just to survive, but to trust. To connect. He is my soul's last companion. And now if he has chosen you, then he sees in you what I always did: strength, kindness, truth. Please, Katya, don't let the world take him away. He's not a creature to cage. He's a life that deserves freedom, with someone who understands. Let him stay, if he chooses. Let him go, if he must. But always remember, he loved truly. And he loved you. Yuri. Tears smeared the ink as she clutched the letter to her chest. It was never just about saving a bear. It was about completing a promise Yuri had started, to give Misha not just a life, but a connection. Fueled by new resolve, Katya contacted the sanctuary director. She showed them the letter. The training logs. The veterinary records Yuri had kept over years. The bond wasn't imagined, it was documented. But policy still stood. A letter doesn't change classification, one official said. He's still a bear. But not everyone agreed. The footage of their farewell had now been seen by millions. Protesters rallied online. Artists painted tributes of the girl and the bear. A wildlife ethicist wrote, "This is not a case of captivity. It's coexistence. A relationship built not on ownership, but choice." And then came the final turning point. A package arrived from a man who'd once served with Yuri in the military, now a decorated conservationist. It included a GPS tracker, custom designed for open-range monitored wildlife, and a proposal. Allow Misha and Katya to stay together under a pilot program. No fences. No cages. Just monitored freedom. The sanctuary board hesitated. But under pressure from the public, scientists, and Yuri's written testimony, they voted. Approved. Misha would return. Katya waited at the clearing near her cabin, the one where he had first stopped before following her. And when the truck doors opened, there he was. Larger now. Stronger. But still. Misha. He stepped out slowly, sniffed the air, and locked eyes with her. No roar. No panic. Just one long exhale, and a quiet walk into her arms. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Because this time, he was home not just by instinct, but by choice. Sunlight dappled through the trees as autumn rolled in over the forest. Leaves turned golden, and the air carried that crisp, familiar bite. Life settled into a quiet rhythm, one where Katya and Misha coexisted not as owner and animal, but as two beings who had chosen each other. The GPS collar around Misha's neck blinked softly, not a leash, not a symbol of captivity, but a compromise that allowed him to remain free, protected, and accounted for. Each morning, Katya would open the cabin door, coffee steaming in her hands. And more often than not, she'd find him waiting just a few meters away. Not every day, some days he wandered, deep into the forest, chasing smells and solitude. But he always returned. The officials called it the first legal human-bear coexistence program in the country. The locals called it the Girl and the Gentle Giant. And online? Their story had gone viral. Millions watched videos of them sitting together under trees, Katya reading aloud while Misha lounged beside her like a guardian made of fur and muscle. But not everyone understood. One cold evening, a new wildlife officer, unfamiliar with the case, approached Katya's cabin. He was young, stern, rule-bound. "You're housing a bear. That's illegal," he said, pointing to the field where Misha was rolling lazily in a pile of leaves. Katya didn't argue. She just handed him the letter, Yuri's letter, and let him read. Minutes passed. When the officer looked up, his expression had changed. "He stayed?" he asked, glancing toward the bear. "Even when he was free to leave?" Katya nodded. "He chose to." The officer stared for a while, then turned and walked away, leaving her with one parting line, "Then I suppose he's home." The months stretched into a full year. Misha became more than a local legend, he became a symbol. Schools studied the bond as part of ethical wildlife conservation. Children wrote letters to Katya asking what Misha liked to eat. Wildlife organizations came to observe, not interfere. But it was never about the fame. For Katya, it was about healing, and honoring a bond that had outlived death, doubt, and distance. One rainy night, she dreamt of Yuri. He was sitting beside her on the porch, looking out over the woods. In the dream, Misha was resting his head on Yuri's lap, as if the past and present had merged. "I knew you'd understand him," Yuri whispered in the dream. "Because you understood me." When she woke, Misha was standing just outside the window, looking in calm and steady, as if he had dreamed the same thing. Eventually, government officials arrived for a final evaluation. They watched Misha in the wild, analyzed his stress levels, reviewed the GPS logs. When the report came in, it said one thing loud and clear. The subject has shown full autonomy, low aggression, and repeated voluntary return to a human partner. This is not a case of taming. This is coexistence born of early bonding and trust. They called the program a success. But for Katya, it wasn't a program. It was her life. Her family. Her promise kept. One crisp morning, she stood in the clearing, reading a book aloud while Misha lay nearby. A group of deer passed in the distance. The wind rustled the golden trees. And for a moment it felt like everything, Yuri's sacrifice, Misha's return, the letter, the months of pain, had led to this single quiet breath of peace. She closed the book, smiled, and said softly, "You didn't just come back, Misha. You stayed." And the bear, silent, strong, and whole, blinked once, lowered his head beside her feet, and let out a long, gentle sigh. They weren't wild and human anymore. They were just home. Sometimes the deepest bonds form in silence, not through words, but through trust, loyalty, and love. This wasn't just a story about a bear that came back. It was about keeping a promise, honoring the past, and proving that connection can transcend fear, distance, and even species. When you love with your whole heart, they always find their way back. Bareface Yellow Heart.